about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my roll shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose Vic homes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money brought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Okay, this is Voice of Rebellion. I have Chris J added in. Welcome to UCY.TV. I'm wondering if we've got a problem here. So let me look here for the message. There we go.
I'm actually here. I thought that music might have been playing. I just didn't hear it, so I was just going to wait till 9:02 to start the show. Anyways, sorry for that technical difficulty. Yes, this is Chris J. This is Voice of Rebellion Radio. Tonight's topic, I say it's going to be a pretty controversial one. And I expect a pretty good debate. I know it's kind of straight into the more I've been recently seem to be the more current events, what's going on right now. We're going to a more historical topic tonight for the Bolshevik versus White Russian show tonight. It's going to be more of a debate. I'm just going to give us some facts. I'm not really going to take one side or another, may lead in their show. Because actually, who knows? Some of you might actually sway my opinion. Just to let everybody know, I know some of the people that have been loyal listeners of Voice of Rebellion Radio, and I don't even know if it was Voice of Rebellion Radio when we did that a show way back, I think like the first week of November 2014. I did a show. That was the last time I talked about the Bolsheviks. Well, actually, I kind of talked about them in August. Talk about Leon Trotsky. I can tell you one thing is that my opinion has changed somewhat with some further research. However, I can say that I'm completely flipped on the issue, but I definitely see things a little bit more clearly on that. And I know definitely the last time I talked about the Bolshevik Revolution as a whole, it definitely was going to be a lot more favor of the Bolsheviks than I'm going to be in this show. I think one of the first things they should clear up when we talk about the Bolsheviks, we a lot of times there's many things come through, and especially in the Trucer community. I mean, we see a lot of people see this again. That they talk about Trotsky being paid by foreign bankers, being paid by the Schiff family in Wall Street, or Trotsky coming back to Russia with a lot of money. There was also just a lot of talk about the Bolsheviks. All these Bolsheviks basically being a foreign infiltration a lot of times. We're talking about the Trucer community. The quotes by Alexander Solzhenitsyn get utilized. I have to say now, I want to talk about one thing first, is that it was not communist versus monarch. This was not the White Russian versus Bolshevik conflict. It was much more complicated than that. And I'll explain you one thing. For example, Kalmuch were a socialist group that fought on the White Russian side of the war. I believe they fought alongside the White Russians, and they were followers of socialists, and they fought against the Bolsheviks during the war. And they were just they're just a group that really it was just many different people across Russia, and they were in. But there it is, right there. There's socialists on that side, or socialists on the other side. The other thing is that foreigners were definitely on both sides of the war. We have foreigners on the Bolshevik sides, of course, with the Bolshevik movement being predominantly a lot of East European Jews who were in the movement, not belonging to Russia. A lot of them, like Trotsky, was from Ukraine. We have many, just also a lot of just Eastern Europeans in general. We have Stalin from Georgia, who is definitely, I can tell you my strong opinion against him, was a murderous tyrant that killed probably upwards of 30 million people, and definitely created havoc in Russia towards just people of many different backgrounds, dissidents, towards people who don't party. You just create. It was horrific what Stalin did. And then we're going to go to, but we go to the other side, and there were foreigners on the White Russian side, because look what happened is that, not to forget the Bolsheviks did have a lot of the Mongolian, more Asian supporters were on that side too, but so did the White Russians, because they had a lot of people in the Far East regions that supported them, which was kind of it was like 50-50 over there. Of the few people that lived over there, the Bolsheviks and the White Russians were kind of split for support. A lot of Siberians support the White Russians by the fact that they believed once the war was over, they could be separate and have an independent Siberian country away from European Russia. There's still a little bit of, it's really an obscure movement now, the pro-Siberian movement, but back in that time, there's a lot of support behind it. And then we'll talk about also, we had from the southern parts, going towards further south, almost down by Turkey and all, going way south into the South Caucasus regions. We had there was Muslims, and they were called part of the Alash state that they wanted to create down there, which was a Sunni republic that they wanted to make. They were in support of the White Russians, and they were against the Bolsheviks. So again, you have people that were not what you would necessarily think of as Russians, but then again, not forget that there's many different diverse groups in Russia. It's not just white Russian people. It's, Christians. There's Jews, there's Muslims, there's Christians, there's people not religious. And it's always been like that. But there's these people were they're kind of iffy part. I mean, it was way far south where these people were on the White Russians supporting them. And then you had, also on that side, you had also the Germans. There were German volunteer groups and stuff that came, especially after 1918, after the German Empire fell apart. There was people that were coming from Germany to fight against the Bolsheviks. And the thing was that originally the German Empire had appeared to at least mildly have supported the Bolsheviks by sending Lenin back to Russia after being exiled in Germany. Was in a guarded train, and what appeared to be a attempt to disrupt the war effort that the Russians were waging against the Germans on the Eastern Front. So you see the whole foreigner, that's an often argument that's used by the White Russians, or people who support intellectuals that support the White Russians, and the historical arguments is that, the Bolsheviks had all these foreigners, but also the Bolsheviks, could have said the same thing about the White Russians. They both had a lot of foreigners supporting them. And also eventually the Americans did intervene to support at least a faction of the White Russians. They more, not that they actually cared about the ultimate outcome, it seemed like, because they only intervened into Vladivostok, I believe. But they went, that was where one of the major where they grouped up the Vladivostok and try to defend it from the Bolsheviks from taking over there, which is way the far east by Korea, which you can see wouldn't be that far from the United States and Alaska. So it came into the interest of the United States, because a major city that close, belonging to now would be a communist country, may just didn't want that part specifically to be taken over by the Bolsheviks. Maybe they didn't really care what happened in Eastern European Russia, but definitely over in Eastern Asian Russia, way closer to the United States, that was a bit of a different story. I know it seems kind of irrelevant to talk about it. 98 years later, we're talking about. since the Bolshevik Revolution actually took place, and also we're talking about the Russian Civil War at this point, because the Bolshevik Revolution it was very short, actually. It was the actual revolution. There wasn't that much of a fight. The Tsar Nicholas II's troops escaped the St. Petersburg, where back then it was named Petrograd, which will later be renamed Leningrad. Which they named that in 1914. To Southwest Germany, actually, was where the root of that. But they escaped very, very quickly, and then they eventually got captured. And we all know what happened to the Tsar family at the hands of what some people would say was a rogue Bolshevik action. Some people say it was systematic Bolshevik action. And it's a lot of people support it or don't support it. I could see, I'll definitely see the reasons to be against that action, because it was a very brutal action, killing his entire family. People that weren't even guilty of the actions of the Tsar Nicholas II. And, there are many arguments of why the Russian Civil War took place. A lot of people say that this was a site. There's often, I don't know if, I believe it might be more of a rumor than cited evidence, and it's really hard to pull out evidence considering this happened 100 years ago, and we're just going by scripts and mostly. But it's said that that would definitely make the things a lot clearer if that's definitive proof that the Romanov and the Rothschilds feuded at each other, and that the Rothschilds did not like the Romanov family, which of course the Rothschilds trying to, as an integral part of, they are practicing the New World Order, financing most of the New World Order components and working towards the fascist New World Order, and they've been doing this for the last 300 years, so definitely could have came into play the Rothschilds right here, like they came into play most events in the 20th century, and will continue into the 21st century until we stop them. So the Rothschilds could have definitely had a hand in this, and they might have wanted to take out the Tsar in the name of the revolution. They say, well, this is because they've used humane action. The Tsar was being inhumane. The Tsar, they talk about Bloody Sunday, and Bloody Sunday was 1905 when the Tsar's Imperial Guard, I believe they killed 500 protesters in St. Petersburg, which back then was the capital. So they also talk about the Bolsheviks. Supporters will talk about how brutal they believed it was, and the low wages, the extreme poverty, the police state that existed under Tsar Nicholas II, and before Tsar Nicholas II was I think it was Alexander. No, my name was Nicholas the First. No, I'm gonna get this all confused. It was Alexander the Third. Before him was Alexander II, I believe, was the one that was assassinated. Then we have, before that was Nicholas the First, and then before that, I believe, was Alexander the First, Alexander the First, the one that took on Napoleon and defeated him and did the scorched earth policy and stopped Napoleon in Russia. Again, Russian history had many turns, had many different players in it. But definitely, when we talk about the revolution of 1905 and 1917, are definitely some of the most interesting. 1905, Lenin and many of the same players that came into play in 1917 tried to do a revolution against the Tsar, which at that time had a lot more reason to have committed a revolution against the Tsar, because at that time things were very brutal. And mainly, what was it is that the Tsar and his police had initiated a total autocracy in favor of the Tsar, and there was no parliament or anything. There was no intermediary between the people and the Tsar. And the Tsar, after the revolution, initiated the new constitution and put a parliament. There were the political parties and all that afterwards. And that's where the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks all come into play. And then there's the Russian originally there was the Russian Social Democratic Party, which went way back. I mean, there was political parties in Russia before 1905, but they didn't have any power because there was no parliament to actually represent themselves. It was just the Tsar and his court and all the ministers that he had. and then after that, it changed a bit, but it still was a monarchy. And that was a constitutional monarchy. And, 1917 comes along first. There's the first revolution, which wasn't a really revolution. It really was actually just a transfer of power, because the Tsar kind of had one of his guys actually in the Menshevik movement that was much more moderate than the Bolshevik movement. In the Menshevik movement, he put in Alexander Kerensky, who Alexander Kerensky was most likely, if he had stayed in power after the March Revolution, would have probably restored the monarchy. However, after that happened after Tsar Nicholas II's abdication of his throne, and then after that, in October, where the famous one happens, where again that's where the Bolsheviks take over, and after that, that's when officially the Russian Socialist Federative it's a complicated acronym there, but the Soviet Russia was officially a Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic or something like that. Is now, but not the Soviet Union, because that wasn't signed until 1922. Towards the end of the war, of the Russian Civil War, that's when they pretty much had it wrapped up. Then they signed the Soviet Union Treaty, and then there was not too much violence afterward, going into 23 and 24, I think. 24 is actually when Lenin dies. Stalin takes charge. So pretty much almost all of Lenin's premiership is the Russian Civil War. That's probably why he died so early. Very stressful premiership that he had. And there was also an assassination attempt by an anarchist in 1919. It didn't kill him, but I think it did put a bullet in his head. We're also talking about, there were so many different sides inside the side. There's two sides, of course, the White Russians and the Bolsheviks. However, the Bolsheviks, these anarchist groups and these other socialist groups split off from the Bolsheviks about halfway into the war, and then they joined the other side. And then there was already socialists from the beginning had been fighting against the Bolsheviks. There were many different factions inside the White Russian Army themselves, including people that wanted to directly restore the monarchy, many people that were more realistic and didn't want to restore the monarchy, but wanted to protect the country from what they considered foreign invaders, and continue a Christian Russia, because they knew the Bolsheviks would do what they did. There is many ways of looking at the Bolsheviks. I mean, some people, almost put the argument, well, these people, they do put the argument of 80 to 85%, is what it said. I think it's more of a rumor than anything, were Jewish, is what they said, of the first Soviet government. I think it's true there were many Jewish people in the first Soviet government, but I think it was a little bit exaggerated. However, it does raise an eyebrow, because we are thinking, okay, well, this is a bit odd. A country that had just a few percent Jewish, and you had a government that was this percentage of being Jewish in a majority Christian country. What was the purpose of that, or was there any purpose? Was it just completely coincidental, which doesn't seem likely with such a circumstance like that? The first Soviet government was, of course, the Bolsheviks, Lenin, the old Bolsheviks, Trotsky. Stalin, of course, was an old Bolshevik, and he was the last one remaining after he purged all of them. Just him and Molotov afterwards. Molotov was, like in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, also known as the Soviet Nazi non-aggression pact, was the Molotov in it, and Molotov was pretty much Stalin. I don't know if it's the same name as Secretary of State for Stalin, and that was pretty much the only one remaining into Stalin's premiership. Which, Stalin was the premier of Russia for 30 years, actually, from 1924 all the way to 1953 at his death. So when he died, he was like 70-something years old. He ruled from his early 40s, something like that, all the way until he was almost 75 years old. And Stalin just a complete wrath terror that he committed. Some people credit him for the defeat of the Nazis, but the Nazis ultimately were defeated by, it was the Red Army did do some glorious actions in World War II, but it was not because of Stalin. They won in spite of Stalin, because Stalin did everything practically, it seemed like, to fall into the Nazis. It seemed he had made many tactical errors, and it seemed like almost intentional blunders. And of course, the signing of the Non-Aggression Pact with Nazi Germany does raise some eyebrows. Of course, the bankers had a big role in World War II happening. And I think what we saw ultimately was Nazi Germany was a military machine created by the bankers. I think they kept saying New Order and how we're going to do world conquest. I think Nazi Germany was the original plan to take over the world, and that has been handed over to the United States, and that's the new military machine of the elite. We're talking about the Bolsheviks and the Russian Civil War, and there's a lot of what ifs too. It's like, what if the White Russians would have won the war? What would happen 20 years later with World War II? Would there have been a World War II with Russia, with this whole different stance? And also there's also the brutality, and how there definitely were pogroms before 1917. They weren't made up. However, how brutal were they? Were these isolated incidents only supported by? Were they isolated incidents not supported by the state, or were they supported by the state? There's a lot of arguments. Why were there all these Jews that were in the Bolsheviks? And probably, some people say, well, that's because they were oppressed by the Tsar and in his government. Of course, there's the third argument, which I think could be closer to the truth, is that they're both brutal governments. Especially, Stalin became himself like another Tsar. Ivan the Terrible, or something like that to be compared to. There's definitely good Tsars and bad Tsars. It seems like, for example, you'd say Alexander II was more one of the good Tsars. He did liberate the people from serfdom, which was practically like slavery. He ended that, and oddly enough, at the end, he gets assassinated in 1882. They blamed it on revolutionary former serfs. It's like the people that they really bit the hand that fed him, because they threw the person that threw a bomb at Alexander II, I believe, was a former serf, or from a group of serfs that formed some revolutionary movement, and they killed the person, Alexander II, in 1882. And of course, there's just many series made about that as well. And of course, why I'm not really, why am I taking it mostly just bland stances? The show was, it's going to go a little bit mundane, sounding debate. If I just sit here giving facts and opinions that other people have, because, in some of my opinions, because there's so many arguments for both sides. Hoping, people call in and we start a debate here. Which I actually might journey onto the chat room and see what's going on there, because a lot of people go in the chat room and give their opinions, but won't call in actually. And don't be shy. I'm not going to be a total asshole. Those days are done. Avoid everybody being an asshole to some people that call in or whatever. Unless you do something totally absurd, I'm not going to be like that. And the Bolsheviks, Bolsheviks, it just seems to be their whole movement was atypical from even like other socialist movements in the future. Definitely, for example, for one thing is that they were not nationalist whatsoever. It seemed like, and that's true. That the White Russians have a very strong argument on that. Is that they did seem to be standing for patriotism of their country, because the Bolsheviks didn't really care about patriotism or Russian identity, and many comments are very suspicious by Lenin. In fact, especially once we start to talk about the United States of the world, and talks about pretty much what seems to be one state for the entire world, which sounds awfully like the Rothschilds' plan and the elite's plans that he says to be against the elite, the New World Order, which, if I'm not mistaken, Lenin made quotes that sounded very much like what these people had planned. So that would definitely give a lot of credit to the idea that the Rothschilds might have been behind the Romanovs' proposal for power, because they had a different guy that would, because there was definitely one thing about the Tsar and the Russian monarchy is that they were very nationalistic, and they didn't really bow to foreign pressure that much, and made even the foreign pressure of the banks might not have had much of a pull on them, but they could definitely get a pull on the Bolsheviks. So, Tsar Nicholas II was killed, and I mean, it goes so far. It's such that event that happened in 1918 in that house. The Tsar was executed. I mean, it's even there's that Rolling Stones song where it's supposed to be, the guy's supposed to be Satan or whatever, and talks about killing the Tsar and his ministers because he believed it was time for change. So it's like it's even gotten into pop culture, that whole event in general. It was one of the most. It's pretty shocking when you think about it, because these people, and they dragged them down. They said it was going to be a photo, and then these people unleashed their guns on the whole royal family of the Tsar, including the children. And they thought one got away for a long time, and they found out later that she actually didn't get away. The entire family was probably disposed of and buried, probably in the backyard of the house. It was very. Okay, I was still on the call. I wasn't sure if the call was continuing while I was going to go onto the browser here on my tablet. I heard some complaints about the sound quality recently, which I hear you, and I'm going to take a little bit more steps this show, and I'm hoping you guys will receive a better quality show this time around. I know there's a lot of information with this Bolshevik White Russian topic. I mean, there's just so much, so many different groups. There was, for example, there was also one group on the White Russians that had quit about halfway through actually it was about 3/4 through the war, and a lot of times they're cited as one of the main reasons they lost the war, because the Cuban the Don Cossacks is a different group. This is the Cuban Republic, which is not this. Okay, and let me remind you, this is not the same Cuba, unless I'm pronouncing it wrong. At first it's pronounced Cuba or Cuba, probably. It was a K as the country in the Caribbean, but where the cigars come from and the good-looking women come from. But no, this is Cuba, which is a region, I believe, in Russia somewhere, where they wanted independence from the Russian Empire, but in exchange also they would fight along with the former monarchists and also the other White Russians against the Bolsheviks. And also, just to clarify another thing, is that White Russians did not necessarily have a racist opinion like it might sound. The White Russians were not a white supremacist group for the most part. I mean, there were definitely white supremacists and anti-Semites in the movement, as well as there were, and it's true that also the Bolsheviks, there's a lot of talk that they're Zionists, or that the main guys are Zionists. There were Zionists at the beginning of the movement, but they were exiled, from what I read, early in the movement, as they were cited as nationalists. And the Bolsheviks didn't accept nationalism of any kind. But it also should be noted that one of the original Bolsheviks, who would later become the premier for 30 years, Stalin, was the second country to recognize Israel, right after the United States.
Okay, we have a caller, Chris.
Yeah.
Hey, Dal.
Welcome, Dal. Welcome to the call. This is a chatter, Dal, down in Nicaragua. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion with Chris J.
So you're talking about tonight, Chris?
It's posted that chat. I'm sorry, Chris. Let me. Yeah.
So I have been listening to the radio. I know what we're talking about, but what do you got for tonight, sir?
wait. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I'm going to put on my headphones and I'll be able to hear you a little bit better.
You know what?
Yeah, what were you restate what you were saying?
That could be my fault because I'm calling from a computer telephone, and sometimes it throws. So maybe you have a shitty connection.
Sorry, I just put on the headphones right now.
All right. If you can't hear me, I'll go.
That does work too. But anyway, tonight, I was just talking about. I'm not having any real guests on. I just had some callers. I just thought to put some callers on the show. I have a lot of callers and have a little bit of debate, and that's why you don't see me really taking one stance too heavy or another.
Well, you asked for a call. I'm doing it.
Yeah, I just want to hear. I mean, I was talking about just many different myths and kind of debunking some of the myths, and actually, giving some credit to some of them, how they're true, and how they're false, from my own opinion. And I say there's many arguments about the Bolsheviks and the White Russians, which one, and I ultimately going down to which one was Zionist funded, which one was working, which one furthered the New World Order's agenda towards Russia. And I said Lenin, talk about, how Lenin had said quotes about one United States of the world, which I always found a little bit suspicious after finding out. But, I just want to hear what's your opinion then. Which group, if any, or of all, was furthering the New World Order's agenda there in Russia?
You know what? I'm sorry to waste your time, but I can't hear you either. So I apologize. I'm gone.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know what was the problem.
Okay.
I was hearing both of you fine here, so we have no server connection problems or errors here. So the only suggestion I might add is just be a little more careful on moving. I know that's pot calling the kettle black on my end. So, but anyways, you're doing great, Chris. Continue on, and if we have any more callers, I'll add them in. Thank you.
Well, I heard him. I had a little bit of problem hearing him, but that last sentence he did it. I heard him pretty good on my end. So, and I was just scroll and look at my Wi-Fi here for a second, and my Wi-Fi is perfect. It's I got pretty good signal, so it shouldn't be any problems on my end. Again, like you said, if he was calling from Nicaragua, who knows what kind of connection problems are coming from a call that long distance, or down there. Sometimes, a lot of times in the third world, you don't exactly get the best Wi-Fi. Now I kind of lost the train of thought because I was going down a really good train of thought, and then the caller came in. I was talking to us about Stalin recognized Israel very quickly, and he justified this trying to say, well, he wanted to make a socialist Israel, which Israel ended up becoming a fascist state, very much like Hitler said Jews towards Palestinians, and there wasn't any, there definitely wasn't any, especially at first, Stalin didn't seem to be too anti, there was no questions of Israel's intentions, and really throughout most of his premiership, he never really criticized Israel. He did criticize, he didn't exactly have the support, never did the USSR really too much of the Muslim world. Stalin, I think that Stalin's recognition of Israel definitely raises some eyebrows, but then again, Stalin was separate practically from the rest of the Bolshevik movement because he practically killed the rest of them and left him and Ribbentrop to survive pretty much. Or not Ribbentrop. Ribbentrop was the German, the guy who signed the agreement. Molotov. We got that confused with Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, aka Soviet Nazi non-aggression pact, and which again, the signing of the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was one of the most reckless actions that the Soviet Union ever did, and he really did commit he did commit national treason there, because the Nazis would invade and kill millions of people, and it would be blindsided by the Nazis' invasion that was quick, right into Russia. They took territory so quickly, miles of territory within days. They would take hundreds of miles during Operation Barbarossa. It was just so unexpected in 1941, and by 1942 they got deep in the country, and that's where Stalingrad happened. It was 1942, February 1942. Of course, just like it sounds, Stalin had a town named after him. I find pretty unfortunate. And then later, it was renamed Volgograd. That's what it always been named. Returned to its historical name. That's what it is right now. It's a pretty big city. It's in southern Russia. That just says Germany's up in the north. And they will, actually, they're kind of would be like the middle of Russia. They're all around. Germany's around 50 something north, but they kind of went south. I mean, they quickly started engulfing Russia within just a short time. And by 1943, they got repelled out of there. A huge Soviet counteroffensive, But they did a horrible siege on Leningrad, which is one of the worst crimes against humanity that was ever done. Putin's parents actually survived that. I talk about that. His mother was thrown in a pile, thought that she was dead, but she was actually alive. Putin's dad went looking for her. Just all kinds of horrific stories came out of Leningrad, which, as we know now, St. Petersburg. And again, this gets all complicated by the fact that all these cities have changed names so many times. Petrograd had turned into Leningrad. St. Petersburg turned into Petrograd in 1914 to lose its German-sounding name. I guess the Berg made it sound pretty German. So in 1914, it was renamed the Petrograd by Tsar Nicholas II, right after a declaration of war against Germany. 1918, it's renamed Leningrad. Actually, I believe it was renamed Leningrad actually in 1921, or maybe it was after his death. I don't know. I think it was like 21. Leningrad gets renamed. The capital gets moved to Moscow. For all those hundreds of years, the capital had been St. Petersburg. Then all the way till 1991, it had been Leningrad. It was after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's renamed St. Petersburg, and that's what it's been named since. The names Volgograd is every day, one day a year renamed Stalingrad, not as an honor of Stalin, just in honor of the battle, made the worst battle in human history, where about 1 million Soviets died, probably 1 million Nazis died. Well, not 1 million Nazis, but hundreds of thousands of Nazis died trying to fight for Stalingrad. Just an awful event in human history, but it is historical and it should be remembered. So that's the reason why. I mean, putting in, his own comments, talking about, as him as an anti-New World Order leader, as he rejected the Rothschilds, he's not supported the Bolsheviks, and he doesn't have different opinions about the USSR. When it comes to Bolsheviks, he calls it a national treason because he believes that they went right into the German agenda of World War I to have Russia give up on their war effort, and then the Germans would sign a peace agreement with the Bolsheviks, and they just disrupted the whole war effort on their end. We're going to actually journey on here to the chat room in a few minutes, and see, because I know if I already had a caller, there's probably a lot going on in the chat room. So I know last week it went pretty good going into the chat room and see what was going on there. We also, there's a lot that's going to be forgotten about through the history and just through so many accounts, going second-hand, third-hand, and then going into so many different hand accounts, so many hand accounts that, because of the fact that it's also happened 90 years ago. It's almost, I don't even know if there's any survivors from that at that point, the Russian Civil War. It started 98 years ago and ended 93, pretty much the official one was 93 years ago. So it's something that ended that long ago. How many actual survivors are going to be? Is there going to be? I mean, there's good. What? Yeah, if you were 10 years old when it happened, you'd be 103 now. There's probably so few actual survivors. So now we're just going second-hand accounts, third-hand accounts. More likely, people going into their fourth, fifth-hand. We're going. It doesn't happen that long ago. I mean, we barely can get first-hand accounts from Korea, or something like that happened just 65 years ago. This is 95 years ago. We're talking about the majority of the war. So again, we have to take everything we know with a grain of salt, because it's just the reality was different from city to city in that war, and that's true. Because, for example, Vladivostok, there was the United States involvement was in there, and then when you go into Western Russia, there's the German involvement was in there. So there's foreign groups that got involved. And also, let's not forget that one of the main big struggles of the White Russians, a lot of people that supported it, were the countries trying to break away from the Russian Empire. And there's just many little countries, that we now just know as these countries in Europe. Most didn't actually get the break away from the Russian Empire. Finland did, famously. And Finland had an animosity with Russia ever since. And Finland, really did some disgusting acts during the Finnish Soviet War, and by being aligned with Hitler, I think, which is one of the most disgusting acts they did. But you can see why would they be trying to fight for independence back after World War I, after they got dragged into the war by the Tsar, and they were afraid they would be dragged into whatever war in the future by whoever was in charge of St. Petersburg or Moscow. The capital hadn't been made Moscow yet. The Kremlin actually, unlike what you're saying, because the capital hadn't been moved to Moscow until 1917. The Kremlin was actually built way before 1917, but the Kremlin was actually painted white. The Kremlin's been painted red ever since the capital was moved to Moscow. When the Soviet Union was made, the Kremlin was painted red, and it's never been changed, I guess, just because of continuity, and it's just symbolic of Russia's strength. And I think as we see it, it would almost not be the Kremlin as we know it if it was back to the white as it was, to signify the czars and the Russian monarchy. And let's also remember, this is not the time of the Russian monarchy. This is not the time of the Soviet Union. This is his own period of history in Russia that we've seen ever since Putin has taken charge. This is not the corrupt oligarch time of the 90s. This is the anti-Rothschild, anti-New World Order. Putin led Russia, and there's been a revival of Christianity. There's really been a revival of religion altogether in the former Soviet Union. And there's been a lot of stuff a lot of freedoms that they didn't really have in the Soviet Union have been regained during the new Russia. There's been a lot more improvements. But often people try to say also Putin is going to, and they hope that Putin restores the Tsar's rule, but I don't think that's going to happen, because this is a new era, and why would you? The Tsars don't have a really place in modern history. But when we talk about the Russian Civil War and all the arguments about that, we are talking about something from 95 years ago. It was a whole different time. I mean, Germany had the Kaiser, Russia had the Tsar. Even though that and look, there still are monarchies, and you see how horrible they are. Even though if they don't have any real power, they do rule from the shadows, kind of like the British monarchy, which are fascist and were in league with Nazis during World War II, while supposedly Churchill was fighting against Nazis. It really put conflict of interest into the whole British fight against the Nazis. I really am convinced the reason the Nazis fell mostly because the Soviets' giant part in the war, and not Stalin's part of the war. I'm just talking about the Soviet people. And again, I'm not going to say that the Soviets were perfect in that war, and that there was really just clearly good guy, bad guy, Nazi Germany versus Soviet Union, good guy, Nazi Germany, bad guy. Because it was the Nazi leaders for evil, and so were all the Nazi generals and all these high-level men. But you also remember these people were just regular men, a lot of them German soldiers that unfortunately were just brainwashed like the American soldiers of today, and fell into a pawn into the game of the international banking and big war, which it's like I said, it's not surprising that the century of centralized banking is also the century of total war. And go back with the Russian Civil War, there's also the thing, comparisons are on between pogroms. They say that Hitler's ideas for what to do to the Jews was inspired by the pogroms, which it's questionable how much whether that Hitler looked up to the Tsar, because again Hitler did fight on the German side of World War I, so he fought on the opposite side of the Tsar, which if he was really pro Tsar, would he have done that? Plus, somebody. He wasn't just a regular mundane supporter of the war effort by Germany. He was a fanatical supporter. We saw it as one of his biggest achievements of his life was fighting in World War I. He was emphatic about the Germans in World War I fighting, and he just also, he had and he was really hungry for vengeance, for, losing the war, and mainly. One of those things was for what the bankers, what he had believed. Well, he didn't say the bankers, actually. He just said the Jews had done to Germany. What he, again, his vision was very misconstrued, and he misconstrued what was the situation, blamed it on all Jews, and not the banker elite. But he was eventually funded by the banker elite. And then, of course, also, it's really... It's kind of funny, the stories they talk about Hitler in World War I. He would be like painting on the battlefield and stuff like that. He really was a bizarre dude. And I guess people almost, there would be some people that say, "Oh, you look at that, he was a classy man." No, his paint sucked. I don't know. He wasn't. Again, he ultimately became another pawn in the banker's game. No matter how you see it, he became another pawn in the banker's game. And he built a military machine that smashed half of Europe and was trying to take over big parts of the Third World and turn it over to the New World Order. He said the New Order was what Hitler called it, but we all know what it meant. We nowadays, we almost just think of that stuff as stuff that happened 200, 300 years ago. That's why we think in our mind, but it's not really that long ago when you think about the whole scheme of things. Because think about it. World War II, for example, that was something that there's people that are alive right now that were adults during World War II, and still probably got a while to go. There's people, they're 90s now. But that's what I'm saying is that they're not like extremely old. They're just old. There's even people that are from the Russian Civil War that were probably like 10 years old or whatever. Now they're over 100. I'd say there'd be very few of them, but there's probably a few that you could probably find them. Few that survived the Bolshevik Revolution. Imagine that. Old Russia was just. It was a beauty at the same time. There were a lot of horrors that went on because there was serfdom. But we're talking pre-1860s. It's actually when they ended serfdom about the same time the United States ended slavery. And serfdom worked as you were a serf, you turned over your stuff to the lord, the person that pretty much owned you, and you had a contract with for protection from bandits, pretty good protection with his vassals from bandits or whatever, but it really was made up bandits and thieves. The vassals were were knights, would go back to way back. Then it was probably almost a security. And they weren't allowed to leave the manor, which was the property that the lord ruled, which was probably 20 to 30 miles, maybe square miles. Usually you didn't leave that from the time you were born. And it's kind of Braveheart shows that. It's the old-fashioned serfdom from the 1300s. Really, that's a really good movie. You want to see how things were in a lot of Europe, and it wasn't like that way all the way into Russia. So they gave a lot of fertilizer to grow this revolutionary plant against for the Russian Revolution. Now, was the revolution tainted? There was definitely much reason for the revolution, and however, what I would say is that it's what happened, the ultimate outcome of the revolution is what's in question. And then, especially, I'm saying, also 1905 to 1917 Tsar period might have been a little different. Of course, I didn't live, in Russia at that time, and practically nobody that's alive lived in Russia at that time. I just wish I knew a little bit more of what average life was like. How much hours did they work? How much influence from the police did they, which I actually got a little bit of answer to that because Solzhenitsyn's not lying, which, in modern Russia, he's pretty credible. Pundits give him a lot of credit. You know, there people are forced to read his book. In school, they're forced to read the book, The Gulag Archipelago, which is really an important book to read because it shows the ultimate end of abuses of power with Stalin's gulags. It shows that Putin, when people compare Putin to Stalin, it's really a horrible comparison because Putin is no way supportive of Stalin. But Solzhenitsyn said that there was only the three major cities where there were much police, that he did a few roams, nothing compared to what in the Soviet Union. But of course, Solzhenitsyn could be lying. He's oftentimes cited as an anti-Semite. It was questionable if he really was, because at times it seems he makes generalities towards Jews. He cites the Bolsheviks as Jews that had taken over the Soviet Union, and he says that this was a Jewish genocide against the Russians. And he talks about how he does state, which I think there's a lot of credit towards, that the Bolsheviks did not. They were not Russian, a lot of them, including Trotsky himself, which was the commander of the Red Army during the Russian Civil War, and he was from Ukraine. Stalin was from Georgia. Lenin was actually from Russia, and that and had all kinds of different, all these different people in there that were from East Europe, and it's true there were a lot of Jewish people in the first Soviet government. Now, that they have anything to do with what actually happened, that's kind of up to you with the callers to decide. You can give me your opinions on that, because now I'm just going to be giving that much. If I keep going with this, I'm not going to be giving too much for the callers to talk about in this last hour of the show. The Tsar Nicholas II was a pretty brutal man, because his men shot on 500 protesters in the 1905 protest against his regime and against his government, against his government, which was still an absolute monarchy at that time. And then finally, they actually were able to reform into a constitutional monarchy. Oftentimes, they will talk about also. I mean, even his coronation was bloody during a ceremony of a celebration that they had like a big event that was around the coronation where they were gonna, apparently it was something like they didn't know if they were gonna get food or something like that, or if they were gonna run out of food, and apparently that little thing started a giant trampling, and something like 1,200 people trampled because of this. So just like they talk about that, the site, even from the start of his control of Russia, which was around 1893, 1894, he was bloody. They call him the Bloody Tsar for a reason, because a lot of ugly stuff happened. Whether it was to his fault or not is up to for the callers to decide. But I would definitely say 1905 Bloody Sunday was to his fault. I think the coordination was an unfortunate accident, that's for sure. But there's all kinds of horrific stuff happened. There's Tsar Nicholas II. Tsar Nicholas II was it was also it was brutal, but also at the same time there was a lot of press that came towards him, unlike a lot of the czars. So, for example, the Japanese and the Russians got in a war in 1905, and it was actually one of the first times that an Asian power defeated a European power in a war, which humiliated the Tsar. And let's not forget, it wasn't like a heroic struggle of a third world country in Asia, like for example, the Vietnam War or something like that, defeating an imperialist power, United States. But here, Russia, it's a little bit different, because the Japanese were an empire-seeking power. In fact, at that time, in that year, they conquered Korea and put them under a brutal occupation that lasted 40 years, all the way to the end of World War II. The Japanese were definitely no innocent power, and the Russian the Russian Empire was protecting their interest over there in the Far East, which led to their defeat, actually. The United States got slightly involved, I think, actually, because it was in their AO was the military would say area of operations. So the United States, it wasn't too far away from the United States territory. Both times in 1905 and 1917, Alaska was, just a territory. It wasn't a state yet. It wasn't really even occupied too much. Mostly still occupied by indigenous people, I believe, at that time. But in 1959, of course, it becomes a state. And also, it's often said that the Russian, what happened there, and one of Russia's most cited horrible events, the Bloody Sunday. Well, what about the protesters? Were they exactly, did the protesters have any? Were they unarmed protesters? And it seems like what I've read, for the most part, yes. Often sometimes the real hardcore monarchists in Russia or whatever say that they were it was an armed mob or whatever, and that the Imperial Guard were just defending themselves. I don't think it was really true. Of course, you could counter that. When you're going back to the Bolsheviks argument, the anti-Bolshevik argument about some stuff that happened, or it gets blurred. Red and white terror both seem to use terror to further their gains into the Russian Civil War. And 4 million Russian citizens died. So, however you slice and dice it, it was a horrific event. Whether what side you take from it, and both sides will kind of deny what their side probably did, and it looks like both sides did horrible events. Propaganda often exaggerated what the Russians had done, the Bolsheviks had done, which were the current Russian government, and the White Russians, had their own, did many things. The White Russians almost completely, a lot of times people aren't even paid, they're volunteers, patriotic volunteers. So there was, these people were passionate. These people were definitely, these people weren't doing it so much for money. Again, they didn't get any money. It wasn't like the Bolsheviks, where they already had a paid army that suppress the White Russian movement. I think the White Russians, again, like I said, is that before, you wouldn't hear me even saying anything. I would just say, those fucking fascists or whatever. But I've kind of grown on that, and actually looked on the second side of things. And I can tell you that, that they definitely have their own arguments. And that's what makes this event so complicated, is that there's so many arguments for both sides, and there's so many different perspectives. For example, there's the monarchist perspective of it, that, not too much to exist today, but there's also the there's also the social, there's also the socialist non-aligned with the Bolshevik perspective. There's there's the side not looking at either side, just looking at them as both corrupt movements. There's also, there's the Bolshevik side, there's the anarchist side, there's the, and when we're talking about the anarchists that fought in the Russian Civil War, these were in comms, not in camps, just to make that clear. They were, and also kind of like mutualists, which if you know, I know you have to know quite a bit about anarchist ideologies, but there's kind of like three different schools of anarchism. And anarcho-capitalism, I'm not even going to go into this can of worms, because this could be three shows of debates where we could have between, who's the real anarchism or whatever. But anti-caps, like it sounds like, they're capitalists. They believe through the capitalist system they can make a stateless society where capitalism equally and fairly in the free market divides up things, or what, not divides up, but makes a happy life for everybody. Okay, and then ancoms, they believe they can make a stateless society where everybody has equality and justice. Okay, and then mutualists kind of blend most into
kind of both into each other, but they're more lean onto the ANCOMs from, and so we're going back to that. These were ANCOMs that were fighting in the Russian Civil War, which again you can have. There's a little bit here, so that puts a little bit more perspective into different perspectives of there's all these independence movements. All these different countries, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and they still have part of the reason why they still have anti-Russian sentiments in there to this day, really unjustly, is because this doesn't happen 100 years ago. It seems like this happens so much in history, where people hold stuff from 100 years ago and don't put stuff into modern reality, and they ignore that, and then it costs them majorly. And that's why they have some major problems there in Latvia, in the Baltic states, and they get pretty much fooled into supporting the United States, imperial game, and they also, these states that border Russia, the United States has used them and their animosity towards Russia in order to corner Russia. And they spread this hate and propaganda, the United States, to do that, so they can corner Russia and put more NATO bases all around Russia, and they can corner it. It's like Medvedev said. It's like, I'm sorry, I put my country in the middle of your bases. It's like, your country. It should not go to your country. It's my country. It's our country. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting into the chat. I'm going to be answering some of the people's questions once I get into the chat here in a sec. We're rolling on into the second hour, folks. It's been a pretty good show because I've been able to get a lot of info out. And once I get in the chat, I can definitely answer some questions.
Okay, so Chris may have dropped off on his getting over here to chat. So, hey, let me just welcome everybody listening. Voice of the Rebellion with Chris J here at UCY.TV. Connecting voices, broadcasting what matters. For the who, what, where, and when, towards the grammar. For the logic of why and reasoning how. And that's the reason that we're here discussing topics that affect our lives. Yes, Dal, I believe Dal, that Nathan will be live. I've not heard otherwise. And yes, Chris, thank you from Dal. He asked me to thank you. And I'm looking there at the chat. And let me see here. Let me go make sure. Yeah, I have dropped. Chris has dropped off. So let me go see about fetching him back here. All righty. And we'll call him. He may have dropped off trying to get over here to chat. But if he comes back in, he may have to drop going yonder to get back over here. And do we have you back in, Chris?
Yeah, what happened?
I'm not sure what
how
happened.
Long was I off there?
Fell off. Might have been when you tried to change over to chat. But anyways, here's the mic back, and take her away.
I just hope I wasn't off air for all the 5 minutes because I was doing good there.
Oh no, you just fell off for a minute, and I came in and gave you an intro and went and found you and brought you back in. So we're fine.
Okay, yeah. I know that actually compared to some of the shows we had back in the past, this is a pretty smooth. This is a smooth show because I know a lot of times I had some problems with that, but. Today, we're just getting a lot of info out, and and I didn't, I guess it would be better to have done this show in November when we had the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. But again, also December is another anniversary, but it's not a big one this year. The Bolshevik Revolution has been 98 years, and then soon we'll be on 100 years, and yeah, I know it's really. Why is this important? I mean, this is so back in the history. might as well almost be talking about Napoleon or almost the American Revolution or something. But at least but at least with this, we're talking about infiltration of movements. We're talking about not taking movements at their face value. And for example, a lot of people have gotten fooled a lot of times in Europe. It seems like this happens where people say, "Well, I'm a socialist or whatever. I'm this or that. I'm they have all these titles for them, but they end up doing opposite." Or De Gaulle, as a conservative, he actually, usually as a conservative, you think you do almost to stick to the usual West European game of the Cold War, but he actually did many things that were very forward. I hate to use the word progressive because of what it's taken, the meaning it's taken, but I guess you could call it progressive because he liberated Algeria, which had long been a colony of France, and he had done many things to help out the poor. In fact, he was a big supporter of the poor. So I think that this is just another example. The Bolsheviks and the White Russians, they have their face values, and these of them are really true. The White Russians, I think it just really they're a victim of circumstance by the name. The White Russians, it makes it seem like it's a white supremacist group, but they weren't a white supremacist group. They had Muslims fighting in their ranks, well, not in their ranks, but alongside them. They had Asians from Siberia. They were still Russian, I guess. So maybe that doesn't count as true Asians, but they're still Asians. I mean, maybe they weren't foreign Asians, but they were actual Asians from Russia. Remember that Russia is such a diverse country. We talk about Russia. It has whites, it has Asians, it has Jews, it has Muslims, it has Christians, it has atheists, it has. That's actually about it. But and it has also just all people, other people from around the world. There's Hispanics that live there. That especially like people who went from Cuba to Russia during the Cold War. So Russia isn't, but back then even it was diverse. It's always been a very diverse country just because its size. I mean, at one point Russia stretched from Warsaw to Juneau in Alaska. And so think about it, in Alaska, all the way. I mean, this is a journey that if you did that, it's less than over 8,000, maybe 9,000 miles. That Russia wraps around a big part of the world, and Russia's kind of downscaled since now. The Russian never really reached the size of the Russian Empire. But then again, some of the influence and what it has done. The tremendous stance that is taken now, Russia is now taking a big stance against the New World Order and supported the anti-New World Order movements or governments in the anti-New World Order governments in many different places. Iran to Cuba to Venezuela to Syria, and they've helped out the Syrians. Take their fight against the foreign mercenary terrorists that are ravaging their land, killing off minorities, and plan to take over in favor of the United States agenda to put a puppet there. It wasn't the United States ultimately; it's just land that the Rothschilds control now, and they've controlled ever since 1913 with the building of the Federal Reserve. So, what are we? Again, what does this have to all relate to do with today? What things have can we directly compare maybe the Bolshevik Revolution to something that's happened today? And I think there's not really a comparable event, because it's just so atypical. It's an odd event. It's an oddity in the history books. It's the Russian Revolution, Russian Civil War, the Russian Civil War especially. There were so many traitors. There were so many. There's so many different movements. There's so much foreign involvement. I mean, again, it wasn't really a Russian Civil War. It became almost it wasn't yet a proxy war, but there was foreign involvement. There was the United States. There was Germany was involved, and the United States and Germany both supported the same side, the White Russians. But it's a question of how much they supported the White Russians, to what extent, what group. There are so many different groups on the White Russians. Talk about them themselves. We're talking the White Russians. The White Russians. There was the Komuch, which was a socialist group. The Cuban Republic. There was Don Cossacks. The Cuban. I don't know what was, I think maybe it was just called the Cuban movement. The Don Cossacks, which are famous. Those are the people that used to protect the borders of Russia on horseback way back. They still did that at that time, and they still exist today, and they actually fight the same group that kind of revived in the Eastern Ukrainian struggle to take out the West Ukrainian fascists and to defend Novorossiya from the fascist encroachment of their territory. They now it's of course they have machine guns and tanks now, but it's still the same Don Cossacks that were fighting then. And there was many different. There was the Alash Republic, Alash movement. I don't know if they're actually going to make a republic. It's the Alash movement, and there was and there was Finland, Estonia, Latvia, just all these different countries fighting for independence. So it's just, again, it's such a complicated part of history for Russia and the world. And again, it was a bloody thing, no matter which way you look at it. 4 million Russians died in the end, which, just to put that in perspective, only 10 million people died in World War I altogether. And that means that that took 40% of World War I's casualties were put into Russia in just in about the same time span. It's just it's horrific. I can't imagine having survived that, and these people had to survive World War II not much long later, only just about 20 years later. Partially because of who won the war, because eventually Stalin was in charge, and Stalin caused the Operation Barbarossa to kill a lot of these Russians, because the way that he waged the war just altogether was reckless and killed a lot of people, and his strategy was terrible, horrible. It's I could just hear, but I'll save that. But the strategy was terrible because he didn't have a strategy. The strategy was terrible because he would just send men at the problem and hopefully that will solve it. And it ended up having so many Russians killed. He didn't care about the cost, just winning. These Soviet soldiers just sacrificed themselves to the Germans, and of course, since the Russians outnumbered the Germans by 4-1, they were able to do it. But they could have done it with so much less casualties. But thanks to Stalin's efforts, it almost looks like Stalin was trying to lose the war. And most of the time he wasn't out there actually coordinating with the generals, coordinating with soldiers. He was sitting in his bunker, just waiting out the war. There wasn't really much heroes of World War II when you talk about leaders. If there was one, it was Tito, who would become the leader of Yugoslavia not much later. He was he's kind of an on-ball, some people would say, but he was a great leader. Really transformed Yugoslavia into a booming country, and he made it free, and it was a socialist country, but he really had perfected it. Socialism, that is, by he had made a self-management system, which wasn't the state controlling the people; it was the people controlling themselves. It was really there's a difference between what happened in the Soviet Union and what happened in Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, fell apart in the end in '99 when they already had moderated socialism. The Socialist Republic had fell apart, and there was now Slobodan Milosevic, who was a socialist, but he wasn't a Tito. and NATO bombed Yugoslavia, and they supported Bosnia in the war, which Bosnia was done just to cause the rift, and now they hate each other to this day, Bosnia and Serbia. But I think a lot of them are realizing that this is bullshit, and they're becoming nostalgic. They actually want the return of, of Tito, the Tito system, the times. Tito had more support than most leaders will ever see, and they were even thinking that towards the end of towards his through his life that while you can't we can't really think about what's going to happen after Tito dies, because we're going to start killing each other again. Like they had that always been a problem in the Balkans, and the Balkanization has gotten that word. We think of dividing because they're all the same people, but yet they've been killing each other for hundreds of years. In Yugoslavia, they had a period of peace, and then it all ended afterwards. And now they're still having rifts and conflicts. In Belgrade, is Russian. Russia enjoys a better relationship with Serbia than it ever did during Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union did not like Yugoslavia being rogue from the rest of from the Eastern Bloc, because they didn't want to be part of the Eastern Bloc. They didn't want to be part of NATO. They had their own plan for what would happen if Eastern Bloc or NATO invaded. Yugoslavia made their own thing, like I did a show about the non-aligned movement. Going back to this, just saying is that those are comparable, actually. It's Soviet Union, Yugoslavia. Just to make clear is that I don't support the kind of socialism that existed in the USSR too much. I at most of the events that happened in the USSR, it was pretty ugly. It was pretty rough times, and there were some good times, I think, with Khrushchev, but that was about it. Khrushchev and JFK were about to reach peace, and they were both taken out of power around the same time, one by gunshot, another one by exile. And then after that, we had LBJ and Brezhnev, which LBJ was by far the more nefarious of the bunch, because LBJ started the war in Vietnam and did the USS Liberty, which I had the survivors that show, and just the intentions that they had. I'm talking about LBJ and the government was horrible. They wanted to start a war with Egypt, and based on an event that the Israelis did. The Israelis were trying to drag us into a war with Egypt that they were fighting at the time. There was the Arab-Israeli War. That was 1967. And they were trying to get us in the war, and that would have been World War III. That's for sure. Because if we had joined in, the Soviets would have been in there very quickly. Or if not the Soviets, even the non-aligned movement. Like I said, they were the untapped power that nobody really noticed, but if it actually came down to it, they'd be whooping ass. Because Yugoslavians are some fighters. They fought off the Germans practically by themselves without Russian help. I mean, the Russians practically, I'm not talking about the Russian people, but I'm talking about Stalin had pretty much left them to die. And Yugoslavia whooped ass and kicked the Germans right out. And I think they could have whooped some ass against the United States. Maybe they wouldn't have won, but it definitely would have done some damage if the Yugoslavians jumped in for their ally Egypt and also possibly India could have jumped in, because India and Egypt had a pretty strong relationship. Then we'd really be talking about a new ball game right there. This would be, we just up the ante a little bit. We're no longer talking about the ALDS. We're talking about the World Series here. Why do I even go with these terrible sports analogies? Anyways, if anybody wants to call in, because I know that we have the number up on the UCY Radio's Facebook page, but I don't know, not everybody sees UCY Radio's Facebook page. Maybe they're just listening in, but didn't get a chance to call yet. 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. This is Chris J. here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. I just like talking about the Yugoslavians and what they did in War II, because if there were heroes, talk about, Tito led that army by himself. He was the General Marshal Tito, as they called him. I think that's where he earned his nickname. And that was only his third war. He had fought in already 3 wars by that time. He fought in War I. He was kind of in one faction of the Bolsheviks, but he hadn't really, he wasn't really a huge supporter too much. He definitely wasn't a supporter of what happened afterwards, of Stalin taking charge. And mainly what he's famous for is in World War II, leading the resistance, the Yugoslav resistance against the German occupation. People think Yugoslavia is much further east than it is. They think it borders Russia. It's really close to Russia, but it's actually not really close to Russia. It wasn't really close to Russia politically or geographically. It's in Southeast Europe. It's a lot closer to Italy. Not politically, but geographically it is. Yugoslavians don't really look like Russians either when you see them. I mean, Russians have their own look. I don't really think that. I think that the Russians have quite a few different looks because they're such diverse people. But like I said, it's like the Slavic look that it does transfer over because they're both Slavs, Russians and Yugoslavs, which that's where actually the Yugoslavian come from. Yugoslavia is actually just means land of South Slavs, which they're the Southern Slavs, and the Russians are Northern Slavs. Which another just thing, fact to point out is that yes, to Hitler, all the Slavs were pretty much subhuman practically. That's what gave them their mutual friendship. Should have gave them their mutual friendship. The people, Yugoslav and Russian people, between the governments, and there was no real government in Yugoslavia during War II. There was only there was only 2 kind of in exile governments. Neither had taken power, but in a way, the Yugoslavians did. And I'll get back to the original topic here in a second. But I just like to talk about the story. The Yugoslavians, and this is where compare it is that Yugoslavians overthrew a monarchy, Tito and all them, the original kingdom of Yugoslavia. Peter, a little fun factoid here. Peter II was the first and only European monarch to die in the United States and be buried in the United States. He was later moved back to Belgrade in 2013. He was very young, guys. He was only like 19 at the time. He died like around 1970, I think in Illinois or something like that. He was trying to cling on to power, and there was these pro-monarchist guys called the Chechniks, kind of like the White Russians, but not really, because I don't think the White Russians would have never sunk this low. They started supporting the Italians and all these German occupiers and supporting the occupation of their own land, really shooting themselves in the foot if they actually wanted it, because they would just be occupied if they actually, with the Axis actually won the war. And then Peter II just renounced his power around 1944 and actually said gave his support to Tito. The Chechniks, of course, still fought them. They're just known as a word is almost for traitor now in that region. Then Tito, partisans take power in 1945. He's kind of in a limbo state for a while, but he becomes president officially in 1953. Or actually, no, he becomes president in 48, I think, around the same time that the Soviet Union completely disown him, and they get kicked out of the Comintern. They get told they're said, they're pretty much just denounced to hell. And then 1963, Tito's was the big support of the people, named president for life. Which, do I really support somebody being named president for life? No, not really. But when Tito, he almost earned it. I mean, this guy was this guy was made the only hero leader of World War II. Churchill was sleeping in his den angrily for most of the war. FDR was scaling away and doing horrible policies towards domestic people in the United States. Stalin was just being a murderous tyrant and sending his own men to die in the war. Hitler was being Hitler. Mussolini was being a extravagant general that had somehow became a leader of a country for 30 years, 20 plus years, whatever. It might as well have been 30 years. And made all the corporations into power. But Tito was actually out there in the field fighting with his men, and not fighting them, but fighting with his men with the Germans. Going back, I'm just saying, in comparison to what Lenin and Trotsky were doing during the Russian Civil War, they weren't doing that. They weren't actually fighting with the Bolsheviks themselves. They were just sitting back and commanding the army. They didn't have the balls Tito did, but in their defense, nobody had the balls Tito did. And it's almost, it's almost like a movie star in himself. I mean, just all his life was crazy. But Lenin, Trotsky, they after the war ended, that Lenin was almost. I mean, Lenin he died very early, around 50-something years old. Trotsky, there was also the famous split between the Soviets decision to make Stalin leader or Trotsky leader. Stalin's made leader. Stalin goes on a rampage of, just killing millions of people. Trotsky's exiled. The old Bolsheviks are purged, which is not saying that Stalin was anti-Bolshevik, anti the ideology of communism. Whenever he's not a communist, it just was out of show of power. He was an authoritarian. He was a tyrant. Stalin was by far, I would say, not only the worst Russian leader that's ever probably existed in the Soviet Union time or Russian history. It's the worst Russian leader to ever exist. But it's almost safe to say maybe the worst European leader to ever exist. I almost find weird calling Russia European because they aren't really European. I mean, they're different from the rest of Europe, and they're so much more diverse than a lot of those European countries are so homogenous. Just all the same people, those Sweden or Finland or whatever. Russia is just I think this was just amazing thing that Russia's worked this long. It's been 1,200 years, and they've been able to get along for the most part inside the country, which is a few. Well, I think they just had one civil war. Also, around the same time of the Bolshevik Revolution, we had in Germany, we had this other thing. We had the Germans' revolution, which I think that was legitimate. However, that was during the Weimar Republic time in 1919. The fallout from the German Empire, the bankers just did a slash towards Germany. They devalued their money so much they were using it as firewood. So it caused a lot of animosity. It caused a lot of extremism in the country. As we know, the right wing, the far right, eventually won out. I think that these weren't really the same people as the Bolsheviks that were in Germany during the revolution. There was I think Rosenberg, Luxembourg, which, unlike her name, from the name of a ritzy country in Europe, she was a supporter of the poor. However, she was ultimately betrayed and she was killed. Germany, I would say ever since the fall of the German Empire, has just been ailing, because they've just had so much horrible times under the Weimar Republic, or was it under Hitler? Was it under West and East Germany, their country being divided? Or was this modern time of Merkel and all these shit leaders that have been putting them into a new Cold War with Russia, just corrupt and causing a lot of problems inside the country, and not really with a lot of poverty. Even those people say their economy is so good, they have a lot of problems that the United States has, and a lot of the first world has. The supposed first world has. It's kind of like what Germany is. The EU experiments has been terrible with so many things that have been the EU's done. It's caused a lot of, it's just the whole liberties that Europe used to have been squashed ever since 9/11. And the EU, it's about to fall apart. after this whole economic experiment of putting all these countries together and putting them all under the same sky economically has not worked, and they're dragging more countries into it. It's going to all fall apart. I'm surprised it lasted this long. We're almost going into another year without the EU having fallen apart. I thought it was going to fall apart 2013, 2014. I've known since I was pretty young that the EU was messed up and was a failed experiment. It was just a extension of the bankers and all that. It's just an extension of the bankers' rule, and it's one more step towards the New World Order. The EU, I think, was established. I don't even know. I think it was established like in the 80s, but the Euro was established in 2002, and that was around the same time that Europe started to become so authoritarian. It became like a police state, all of the continent practically. And ironically, though, they pretend to take the stance of a humane. They talk about, for example, right now the big talk is the refugees or whatever. And it's, they pretend like they're doing such a great thing that they're taking in these refugees after they bomb their countries. It's like you wouldn't have the refugee problem if you hadn't bombed their countries. The least you can do is take them in after you bombed them. We look way back into history, back to the Bolshevik versus White Russians. The Bolsheviks. They did leave the borders. They went into these independent countries, or they weren't independent yet because they hadn't been. The Russian Empire hadn't officially fallen apart. They hadn't lost all these territories. They actually just grandfathered them into the Soviet Union because they were able to control them, and they grandfathered these countries into the Soviet Union. Was it right? Not really, because I think probably the popular support in a lot of these countries was not to join the Soviet Union, but a lot of them liked it later. By the time they definitely were against it. The White Russians, what they have done, they probably didn't want those countries to separate either, but they did out of conflict of interest. There was, but out of necessity, they had to.
We have a caller.
Got a caller, I think.
You got me now?
Yes, we have. It's just Dal Nick in Nicaragua.
Yeah,
Hey,
but I don't hear you. You're all broken.
What?
You still for your show?
Coming out scratchy in there on your call. It's like echoing out. You've entered the call. I don't know what's going on.
Yes,
You guys got to the audio on there because I got you loud and clear.
Okay. Do you have a question or comment, Dal?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do you have a question or comment for Chris J?
Well, yeah, I'd like to have a conversation on the subject that he's speaking about because, he's on air and doing his webcast, and I admire him for that. And, he's asking for callers, so, I called in.
Well, yeah, let's have a conversation then. I was going on to the saying is, again, like I said, just such a complex topic, and I've wrapped around so much stuff, and I'm glad I was have a caller finally. I feel like I'm not talking to myself for all 2 hours now. It's been an hour and a half.
Okay, well, I know, and we're cool on it. I tried to call in the last half hour ago, right? We had a broken line.
Yeah, now I can hear you actually. Now I'm hearing you pretty clear now.
Okay, I'm hearing you too. So this is good.
I guess one of the things I would like to ask then is like, if you know a lot about the topic about the Bolsheviks or whatever and the White Russians, I'd like to ask, do you think the Bolsheviks? What do you think of it? Do you think it was actually a legitimate revolution, or do you think what a lot of people think, that it was more of a foreign invasion by, other East European, groups, ultimately
sure.
the bankers?
Yeah, I think the second thing that you said, because I know I'm older than you are by a generation or so. So therefore, I understand that the powers to be have been at work for, considerable years, for, many, many, many generations. And that, if you follow the money, you're going to understand that their wars are all vanquished wars. So certainly.
Yeah, it's definitely trace back the money on some of this. It's like they would definitely have a lot of explaining to do if we did some kind of financial, jury, and we all were around them about it. It's like, why did you get this money from them? The Bolsheviks, they were, at least it seemed like we're getting money from the German government. They're getting money from all these weird places. There's rumors that they got money from Wall Street.
That's true. That's true.
Like,
what's the real difference to that? If you're getting it from the Germans or from Wall Street, you're still getting the fucking money from the people that are giving you the money. So there's only about, a few families in the world, and, most of their names start with the letter R, and, gee whiz, they're gonna be responsible for all wars and backing all wars, and every bit of arms and every bit of human torture and slavery that there ever has been. Follow the bloodline.
Well, yeah, of course, because a lot of times they're funding both sides of the war, and they're just finding a way to make the most profit out of it and to further their agenda the most. And, definitely what I've been most making the point a lot on the show is that, for example, what eventually happened, with the Soviet Union, especially when you start to go, one of the major events that always strikes me since I found it is that Stalin recognized Israel as he was the second country to do so. So it definitely shows that the people, which we all know that the people that are behind a lot of the country's funding, a lot of the central banking are Zionist, and they pretty much constructed Israel. That was their baby that they correctly made, an evil Zionist baby that now resides in Tel Aviv. So the evidence, of course, doesn't really seem to show that at least the outcome ended up in the bankers' favor. Another question then. What's your personal opinion? Because I know this always gets a strong opinion a lot of times. What's your personal opinion on Trotsky himself?
On trafficking?
Yeah.
On trafficking of arms or money?
I said Trotsky, Leon Brodsky, the commander of the Red Army.
No, I'm sorry, you're above my head right there. Red Army means, to me, that, why don't you tell me what you think Red Army means so I can appropriately answer your question?
Well, I think the Red Army, the Red Army, when I'm talking about the Red Army, I'm talking about the Soviet Union that constructed their military, which the Red Army was their army. But the main is just, I just kind of listen to callers' opinions on this, but the main is just kind of an army of questionable acts. It seems like they did horrible acts with Red Terror, killing a lot of innocent people. And Trotsky seems to have was personally responsible because he commanded the Red Army for a lot of it. And to me, Trotsky, he was a question. I used to look up to this guy, but now I see him as.
So let's jump ahead like a century or half a century, and say what's going on today. And so who's funding Iran, or who's funding Turkey, or who's funding Saudi Arabia, and then who really are the ones that were funding the Red Army in those days? And that's my point that I think is a good.
Well, I know what you're.
To have together.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris,
Well,
we have
I
another
get that
caller
point.
as well. Excuse me just a moment. Welcome, caller. May I have your name, please?
My name is Mike.
Hey, this is Mr. Mike
There we go.
himself. Good to have you on. Okay, you
Now we got somebody intelligent on the line.
okay, me and
Oh gosh, stop. So Trotsky was born Lev Davidovich Bronstein. Now, Karl Marx and Lenin, the entire Bolshevik revolution, the entire communist socialist situation was set up there was designed through okay, I hate to be this way, but I'm going to tell you that the reason that these people organize this entire political organization to take over these large countries comes from a particular mindset. Now, can you tell me, will you admit where these people got their ideas from? What's the basis of thought? Did it come out of the nowhere, out of the ether, or did they actually have some kind of occultic, some type of book or some type of blueprint that they were writing upon the future? Is this all random incidents, or was this a plan?
Oh, yeah. I think that was Mike that was talking there, right? That was Mike, right? That was you, right?
Yeah, that's me. So
okay.
after that, if you can. So what is the similarity between Bronstein and Karl Marx? Every one of those are assumed names. They changed them from their particular Jewish names, and all of their intellectual growth and the way they were going to build the future came from their Jewish past. And why will people not speak about this?
Well, yeah, that's what I've been kind of addressing on the show, is that I look, what I've done on this show, people might be thinking I think I've been doing my best to make it seem like this show, at least for this point of doing this show, is to be neutral. And just let callers, which now we have a kind of a debate going.
I'm going to drop my calls to you guys.
But you have a good point on one thing right there, that of course Trotsky changed his name. I've said that a few times, that he wasn't Russian by any means. He was from Ukraine. Yes, he wasn't a Christian, and why I bring that up is that because the country was majority Christian, yet the first Soviet government was way more Jewish. I think it was than the Christian faction of the government. I think it was anywhere. I mean, it's anywhere from 30 to 80% of that. And also there's another thing. Again, it's hard to find the financial where the money
it was illegal to actually
actually
practice Christianity for how long in Russia? How long was it illegal to practice Christianity in Russia?
Wait, what was the question again? It came out a little bit unclear.
Sorry, how long was it illegal to practice Christianity in Soviet Russia?
Yeah. See, I never got a clear answer on that, because I've seen stuff like, well, the in public, I think eventually was made illegal, but I don't think it was ever illegal to do so in private. I don't know, but I know that definitely they were demolishing churches at one point, and I think that the Red Army, that was one of their main tactics. It wasn't one of their main tactics, but it was a tactic with Red Terror, was to strike at churches. But I know definitely.
Yeah, frankly, the government of Russia had been run as a socialist state, an apartheid state also. And it is the same that Israel is run now, and South Africa was run in the past. And this is, a particular mental defect in the people who think they can run a country like that, and it's eventually bound to fail. So when the Marxism, the socialism... Question, how much money does it cost to buy land in Israel for your family?
Well, it depends. I mean, I know how the horrible, fucked up way that the Israeli
You can't buy land in Israel, right? Remember, you can lease it from the Jewish government. So this is the same thing. This is just as pernicious as any religious state. Because come on, how is it any better? How is it? People in the West have no understanding of the fact that Israel is a socialist government. And they're the same as
the characteristics of a typical socialist government. It seems more like just any other fascist state that's existed in history, whether it's Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy. Some people think it's splitting hairs, but I mean, I do like to play semantics. And another thing is that I want to point out is that when we're talking about the, Israeli system, yeah, you can get free land if you're Jewish, but you can buy land, I believe, if you're not Jewish.
No,
But
you
yeah, you don't
cannot.
get the free
You
land.
can only lease it from the government. That's
how it
all.
actually works
Look it up.
oftentimes, is
Look
that
it
they
up.
give out special privileges to
You
special people
cannot
that
buy
they consider
land in
special.
Israel. No, you cannot. You'll never get title to land in Israel. 99-year lease. Did you know that? You'll never buy land.
I think
Yeah,
that's,
look it up, man. I can prove that. You want me to look it up on? I'll post it on the internet if you want right now. But it's a socialist country. There's two state corporations that own all the land, and you have to lease it from them.
Characteristics. Just because there's one thing that they have in common doesn't make a country necessarily socialist. For example, do the workers own the mean of production? No, I don't think so. Israel, they have major corporations that actually pretty much drive their jingoistic war path that they're on. The giant Israeli arms industry, plus their, of course, Zionist government that both work together. And of course, I know the whole truth about Israel. They have the Israeli Supreme Court on Rothschild Boulevard. It is the Rothschild's creation, Israel. I'm horribly against it. It is, in my opinion, made the most evil state on the planet.
So then what do we do about our war industry uses Israel, or Israel uses us for this complete enrichment of global elite? How do we stop that? Because we understand that Israel is the fulcrum in the Middle East, and there's no doubt about it. These guys are ruthless, and it's an evil mindset. And then they use everybody else, America, their dual citizens, use American citizens to go and die and kill for them. How do we stop that?
May I make a comment and ask a question?
Yeah, Vince.
Thanks, Chris. So we see the formation of Israel being set up in the 1800s. The British go in and establish this area, and then in 1948, when Israel becomes a state, they're legitimized, I guess, in the eyes of legal. So my question is, who actually owns Israel? Is it still a pact or a part of the British Empire that continues with the corporatocracy of the United States?
No, Israel separated itself from the British protectorate through a war, terrorism by the Ergon, and another. I can't remember the other one, but the couple of terrorist organizations that actually attacked the Brit, and then so the British gave up the protectorate to a new Israeli state, and it's been war ever since.
Well, yeah, that is true. That in fact, the Israeli terrorists that called themselves terrorists, they boasted, they were loud and proud, and they were proud of the horror that they were able to.
Became the prime minister. Yeah, nice. So we deal. Our best ally is a terrorist state from the beginning. Isn't that great?
Well,
they go to America.
That they were terrorists back then. It's not. They fund terrorists to this day, and so does the United States government. Where do you think ISIS came from? The Israeli Special Intelligence Services, as it should be called. It's just another branch of Mossad to continue the agenda of Israel. And here's an example. Look what they're doing to Syria. They super anti-Zionist government in the past, Assad, and to this day. And he has split away from the U.S. dollar and any Rothschild currencies. And the Rothschilds, he's booted them out. So they unleashed these foreign terrorist pigs, beasts of war into their country. And ISIS has been shown on video training. Israel has been shown on video training ISIS. ISIS, they go back to Israel to go in their hospitals. And they also, all their terrorist buddies, the FSA, Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, Islamic Front, they all get the same special treatment by Israel. Israel strikes in favor of ISIS in Syria, so does the United States. That's what they've been doing. They've been playing around with that, and they've been pretending to be striking ISIS, but no Western power is doing that. Only Russia is doing that at this point. And that's why Russia is able to demolish them in a week and do more than what the United States could do in a year. Because the United States is never trying to demolish ISIS. They created ISIS along with Israel, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, practically every Gulf state.
Yeah, because those are all Sunnis, and you want to kill the Shias, the Persians, and they're taking advantage of that generational war that goes all the way back, to the separation, of the Shia from the Sunni, and so they're very well using that natural split to create war forever. It's actually for the determination of who actually owns Islam, in a way. But of course, even the nations that you name are fake nations because the boundaries were set up after World War I, and they were divided up as protectorates. They weren't even real nations. They were conquered territories, and only over time they become, what we think that they are. But they should have been peoples, and there are natural boundaries between peoples.
Well, let's not forget about the original big division. Is that, as much as people sometimes like to relate, they try to use Israel's name to denounce all Jews or whatever. No, there was a lot of Jews that were very friendly with Arabs before Israel was made, but the Zionists, they don't represent Judaism as a whole, just like the just like the terrorists don't represent Islam as a whole, and they really, to the true Jews, Muslims, they're not a part of their religions. They don't represent. For example, Thomas Herzl was promised by God, a God that he didn't even believe in, the land of Israel. That was practically the start of the Israeli state. I mean, way before Israel was created. These were atheist Jews. The atheist Jews were practically the founders of Zionism. And then the Balfour Declaration happened, where Britain actually promised Israel to them way before the actual creation of Israel. Way before.
And he was a banker stooge. Balfour was. That was a Rothschild leverage. That's the one.
Well, yeah, it was actually, wasn't it addressed to the Rothschild or something like that? I know they had a major part in that.
Yeah, he was there. He was a major part of that. And here's the other thing people forget: that the Sunni Muslims will behead Christians all day long. Shia and the secular Muslims, like that used to exist in Iraq, that used to exist in Syria, that used to exist in Libya, all of those secular governments protected the Christian population. You know that. Before the Sunnis came down, all from the north. You know this. And so the Persians were far more amenable to Christians, right? And look at the Sunnis now. Look at our best allies, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. What do? They behead Christians or people become Christian. I mean, you can't even be found with a Bible or they'll kill you. Now, those are our allies, right?
I read a book several years ago called The Hajj. I dropped it in the chat right there. You can click that link and find about it. And that's life in Palestine when Israeli Jews, or whatever you call them then, were they were living on, I think, a kibbutz. I think Michael probably knows this, these farms. And pretty much they lived in peace. And so, but anyways, that's a pretty good book if you've not read it. And it's been years ago since I read it. But anyways, back to you.
Well, yeah, I want to go back.
Well, my brother actually went and worked on a kibbutz, so I do have a little second-hand knowledge that I trust. And,
I just want to say about, I don't think that the Sunni Shia thing, I mean, I don't think it's really just that cut and dry. I think that, again, when we talk about these Sunnis, they're beheading people. These are not Sunnis. These are Wahhabis. The whole different, Saudi Arabia is Wahhabi state. Wahhabis are separate from the rest of Islam, and these people,
but they're Sunnis.
will behead.
They're
not Sunnis.
It's a fundamental sect of Sunnis. Don't get me wrong. They are truly Sunnis. You know the difference in the divide between Sunnis and Shia, right?
Well, you
do know the difference.
most Sunnis don't recognize them as Sunnis. So who's saying that they are Sunni? I mean, again, we're starting to play semantics
because
again.
that's their output. And the Wahhabists they're financed completely by Mossad and CIA, so they were created at that time to destabilize who? They were to destabilize Iran Shias.
Yeah, okay, but here's another thing. You also said Egypt is not, well, Egypt right now is a secular government from what I understand. They were Sunni under Muslim Brotherhood, and they were going to become like Saudi Arabia. But right now they have Sisi, which it's another can of worms. But I don't think that really...
Egypt it's a big country that's sparsely populated, and it's pretty much still. I don't know why they don't. It's not a fighting zone because they're fully in the pocket of the Mossads. Just like Saudi Arabia is, and Jordan is. Those are all. Every one of them are monarchies that are propped up by American petrodollars, and that is, we're gonna support monarchical despots, and we're gonna destroy secular democratic governments in the name of freedom.
That's how it works, and the whole policy from the Middle East, like you said, ever since, the Middle East just had an interesting history ever since they've been divided up from the protectorates and they got their independence, and especially the last 30, 40 years. And yes, secular countries have been knocked down, especially they're trying to knock down Syria and Iran, it's funny because people think of Iran as being this Islamic fundamentalist state where nobody else is accepted, but that's not true. Christians and Jews live pretty equally there, and there's actually a lot of open opinion. It's really just a regular democracy when you look at it. Iran, also now the Houthis in Yemen are a Shia group that's trying to repel the Al Qaeda and all these extremists out of Yemen, and they've got the popular support.
CIA and the Mossad, you mean? Come on.
Well,
every time you say Al Qaeda, you should say Al Qaeda. Okay, just correct that. You're thinking this is an American interest that is going in to do this against it. Remember that money, those Toyotas, and they come from America. All right, just remember this. Just don't go in there.
Anyway, I want to say thanks to you, Mike, and the other guy that called in earlier. I know you guys called in a little bit late, and already we're almost up about. Actually, I don't know if we have a bumper today.
Thank you, sir.
So
I appreciate it.
But
thanks for taking my call, man.
Hopefully you call back in a future show.
I'll call earlier.
Yeah, next show is the 20th on Sunday. I don't know. I haven't actually made a topic yet on that show. I want to give a shout out before the show ends. Daryl Sherney, who I interviewed way back in May when I was still on Stable Radio. Well, he was just exploring I know that it seems like of course, a joke even to run as a third party, but this is more of a protest than anything. He's actually going to go through with the presidential run and for the Green Party, which but it's definitely in the Green Party it had their own history, which at time the mainstream Green Party I don't agree with at all because they are anti-Russian, but he's not, and I think he's going to turn the Green Party on their heads, which is not really saying much because it's only a party of 300,000 members. We're not getting anywhere through voting. Revolution's the only option, but we are now in the last 2 minutes of the show. We did get some interesting opinions here. My final
point of no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never